So now we're going to close with our last roundtable question and answer round. And who's going to go first? Okay, I'll be right there. Well, wait, I need the mic, so I'll bring it. Because for recording purposes, we need to get you mic'd.
So this kind of goes along with what you were just talking about, developing a second cancer, or in my case, this is my second cancer. What do you do with those patients when they develop a solid tumor cancer or a reoccurrence of one and they're undergoing multiple myeloma treatment already?
Well, I mean, ideally what you can do is treat that second cancer appropriately. Now, I've had the situation where people have been on maintenance lenalidomide, and what we have chosen to do in those situations to stop. And as Dr. Suvasaka mentioned, in lenalidomide in particular, there's always a concern if that was a factor, which you cannot prove one way or another, but we've chosen to discontinue it. I don't know if you all have had. And then you try to treat that cancer, the new cancer, appropriately, whether it's with surgery or whether it's with chemo, and go ahead and do that. There are rare situations where both are active at the same time. Somebody has a very active new cancer and they have active myeloma. That is not an easy situation, and usually it's quite difficult trying to do a little bit of Solomon here. What's the most important issue right now that I got to help this person with? And it's very difficult to try to figure out what you should be doing in that situation, unfortunately.
I mean, unfortunately, I think we're going to see more of the more than one cancer in a lifetime. I mean, cancer in general is the problem with aging, and it can be, I mean, we see cancer incidence go up with age already, and with some of these subgroup where exposure trigger multiple cancers, I think we're just going to end up seeing even more, right? One success led us to needing to watch for the second event down the road. And I'm with Dr. Callender entirely. I think we try to think about what is really the competing problem. And for a lot of our patients who are in remission, projected to do very, very well, for their subsequent cancer, we actually aim for cure. I don't think that our patients should be treated with substandard care just because they have myeloma, particularly when our therapy have improved so much. But there's always a concern about when you use things for two different problems together. Just like any other things in life, right? You're trying to be sure that things aren't interacting in a bad way. So if there's not sufficient data, but one cancer is so quiet and the other is predominating, maybe stopping one to allow full treatment to the other is a little bit better to try to navigate the uncharted territory of combined therapies that have not been looked together before.
I have 3 questions. I'll do the easy one first. You're talking about other cancers. Make sure your patients go to a dermatologist. I was diagnosed with basal cell carcinoma just last year. But anyway, it was very large, very deep, very hard to get under control, but that's a big one. Second one is chiropractic. You were talking about the cement in the bones and the spine. Does that work on other bone, very large lesions and fill in the hole?
Usually it doesn't, and I think that it's mainly limited to the spine, the benefits of this procedure. I think it's mainly limited to the spine, the benefits of this procedure. There are no other, to my knowledge.
Yeah, an occasion I've had, this is very, this is, like, we call them anecdotes, I guess, stories that people tell. We've had a couple of patients who had very large pelvic lesions that we thought was leading to instability. And we actually had, in those cases, a person who was in remission who had bone grafting done. They had bone packed into that area to try to help. And it worked to a certain extent. It didn't make it look completely normal, but we did do that because of concerns of instability.
I have a very large
Right.
No,
No.
please.
I guess I was going to say that the primary reason why it was actually so targeted towards the spine is exactly because that is a weight bearing area, right? So stability is so critical. In some other relatively good sized lesions, even if it's not completely gone, if the chance of complication from those areas were limited, we usually just end up watching it rather than trying to prophylactically going in to do something. But I agree that the pelvis is sort of a tricky thing because while it's not directly weight bearing, it supports the structure of, right. Yeah. So I mean, the pain is the problem there, right? But also, some of you might have actually had either a hip replacement or there's this procedure that nails the big nail inside the canal of the femur to help providing extra stability if there's a large lesion there. Because there you go, that's another area that's really bearing weight. Same deal with the lower leg, but less so a problem comparing to these really big ones at higher up.
Unfortunately, the big one in my femur broke before I was diagnosed with multiple myeloma, and it's titanium now. Anyway, the last question I have is the elephant in the room is for immunocompromised patients such as us, how often do we have a COVID booster?
I love you for that because if you asked me last week, I wouldn't know what to say. Since you asked me today, the FDA has, in case you haven't actually been watching the news, approved, and the CDC included it in the guideline already for patients who are over 65 or immunocompromised, that the second bivalent booster should be recommended. I'm unsure that you can set it up as an appointment just yet, but I understand that big networks, CVS, Walgreens, they're in the process of making online scheduling available. I mean, we understand that the period of high antibody titer is really probably in that range, right? And that the titer probably goes down. Now, we're lucky that we're probably out of the pandemic, but in the specific group of patients that deserve extra protection, the second booster is probably a reasonable thing to do. Good question, because they didn't actually come up and say, well, from now on, you're coming in every 6 months. But it is, as for right now, good number of patients who have already had the first bivalent, right, already have both the Delta and the Omicron type vaccination, are probably a little far from their dose. And perhaps, I mean, if we follow the antibody titer with vaccines in any other circumstance, it actually lasts really in this like 6 to 9 months. So we're probably on the tail end of it. And this is why the recommendation just came out.
I just have a question to follow up on that. What is your experience currently with COVID and your patients in terms of, are your waiting rooms normal like they were in the pre-COVID days? Are you still staggering? I mean, what precautions are you still taking, and what do you see happening in your waiting rooms and with your patients as groups?
We just, as of 2 weeks ago, said that mandatory masking was no longer required, but if patient wished, then the staff would wear a mask at that point. Patients, again, mostly are coming in masked in my clinic still, but it's pretty much incumbent on the healthcare provider if they wish to mask now. Fortunately, at least over the last year, most people who have COVID have not required hospitalization, and the patients who are with COVID in the hospital have been swabbed for COVID because they were there for some other reason and were incidentally found to have COVID. So it's actually, at least for the time being, something that we've let our guards down a little bit.
Yeah, we're actually one of the still institutions that still masks throughout the hospital. In all patient care areas, it's still mandatory. And I don't know if that's going to change or not. When you said, Greg, when are we back to normal? I'm not even sure I know what that feels like exactly. I think just as Dr. Vij mentioned, I was in last weekend in a patient room fully garbed and gowned in my N95 on with a transplant patient who's got COVID. I mean, so yeah, it's gone, but I don't think it's really gone. And so I guess I have to say I'm a little bit hesitant to say, well, where are we going to be in a year? Are we going to be everything seems to be fine. I do think that they are going to have to figure out a way to manufacture a COVID vaccine that's more reflective of whatever's around. But the problem has been, as I'm sure everybody knows here, the virus keeps changing so much faster than other respiratory viruses that it's been really impossible to keep up with. What is it, XB 1.1, I think that's around. So, the variant that's around right now, it isn't covered by the vaccine. I mean, and that's, one concern about, are we, is it good enough? And I appreciate the CDC trying to give us some guidance here, but I think we're going to have to see what happens. But we certainly, anybody who comes in with cold symptoms, we're checking them for COVID, and many times they are positive.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I think it's no longer a pandemic, but it is still endemic in the specific patient population and in ours. So I just came back from presenting data on a phase 1/2 clinical trial of novel immunotherapy. And on that study, 2 patients died, one of which was from COVID. So this is really in an era where we have ability to detect early, we have treatment, but uncontrolled infection is a problem, right? I mean, one patient, not very common, but that's not a negligible thing either. So I think when I think about risk, it's not ever 0 or 100. The only way it'll be 0 is I lock you in the room. It's contagious disease, so if you don't come out, we're okay. But that's not how we're going to live our life. But probably we're not in a situation where we could just live so freely as to go to 10,000 people concert and not worry about it either. So I think we're probably fitting somewhere in between. Pardon? So the thing is this, I think you want to actually be protective as much as you could, reasonably, right? So being able to still use barrier in big crowded space, important. Use alcohol sanitizer wherever you are touching on things you aren't sure about. Knowing who comes into your circle, particularly it depends on the timing of your treatment. Perhaps if you're in remission, not on any therapy, we think about your risk for serious complication as of being a little less comparing to folks who are first few months post-CAR T. I mean, even a cold can get them into a serious problem, so we don't really want COVID to come into play. But also early detection will help. There are other treatments now. There are oral agents that can shorten the duration and the severity of COVID, but you have to be on the lookout. Get tested early. Call your doctor if you have the infection. Be sure that the family members who are coming to visit grandparents, if they were having the clots, get them checked. So this way you know what comes into your circle. But I also think it's important to live life the way that you want to live. Stress is terrible to the immune system. So go out there walking. Now the weather is turning good again. Outdoor is going to be far less likely to be, leading to infection. So kind of navigate thinking about it, but don't get too obsessed would probably be my suggestion.
Thank you. First of all, thanks for today and all the different presentations. I think one thing that struck me was that how fast things are changing, how quickly these new therapies and new different types of drugs and drug combinations are coming in. So my question is with that, will the standards of treatment change, or the criteria for endpoints or certain measurements have to be looked at again in order to say we'll go path A, path B, or path C? And if that's done, will it be done at a high level, let's say one of the conference groups, or again, as will it be done by different universities or areas in their own? So if you could answer that, I'd appreciate it.
I mean, I think really myeloma is still a rare disease. I mean, in your own community, there's just not so many people. So I think to get to that answer as fast as we could, collaboration is key. So it could definitely be university coming in together to tackle particular questions because the investigators have complementary expertise. There are also oncology networks that are trying to help tackling this as well. So I'll say this, when I started treating patients with myeloma, we used to have an idea that, we need to keep some bullets in our pocket for use in the future because, if we just use all of them, then what else do we have to use later? That really, it's important to stretch things out. And the outcome that we want is overall survival, meaning that we're just only going to accept a new change if we could prolong life. Well, while that's nice and good, that's really the end goal everyone wants. Now there's so many new things happening, and you can't just wait for the overall survival data to get interpreted, right? Because we're going to wait too long. We're going to lose the chance of really translating some of the new findings to the group of people who need it today. So there's been a movement to use endpoints that are a little bit faster to read out. And that became this thing called progression-free survival, which means you live in remission without having the cancer coming back. Now we're moving it even further, and we're saying this MRD. This morning, Dr. Callender was talking about the depth of response. Not only we want complete remission, but we also want, if we look really, really hard inside the bone marrow, 10 million cells and more, and we don't see the cancer cell, that would probably be a reasonable thing to conclude that maybe that new therapy is victorious, right? So this is a way that we move the mark. But also, on the other hand, we can't treat everyone in the same way. If we're just saying that, you newly diagnosed, you're all the same, and you're just going to get same treatment, that may not be personalized enough. So this extra genetic information should allow us to be able to say, well, you high-risk people, we are so worried about you. Therefore, we're going to really have clinical trials that target just the high risk. Everyone else, we think that we have a pretty good grasp of what's really going on. They're lumped together. So until we really can customize the clinical trials to target different signatures of myeloma, we're still behind the ball. So I think we're moving towards personalized medicine.
No, I agree. I think that as the period of remissions is growing longer and longer, trying to stick to the old endpoints becomes, difficult to keep progress going at a reasonable pace. So I think that surrogate endpoints like MRD hopefully will one day even be acceptable to the FDA for new drug approval. They haven't yet relented on that. But I think that it is probably coming soon.
I'm not so sure about that. Because we've been having this discussion now for about 5 years, and there's been a big project between multiple large institutions to look at pooled MRD data to say, can we start using this? And unfortunately, basically because everything you've done and all of these people here, with people living so long, then as Dr. Vij mentioned, back in 2000, when the average survival was about 3 years, it sort of made sense to say, okay, if you make that longer, that makes sense. We can approve a new drug. But that is still the bar that's applied to many, many studies, is to say you have to show people live longer. Now, if the average survival is now 10 years, in longer in some types of patients, that's just sort of an impossible bar. And even though, again, at meetings with the FDA, they acknowledge that this is an issue, they really haven't come to maybe a consensus yet that we would like this. Now, I think the shocking thing, if you look at drug approvals and other types of cancer, 1 month better progression-free survival, meaning 1 month of extra time, that'll get a drug approved. The bar has been much higher in myeloma for whatever reason.
We're moving pretty fast, right? So we're, in a way, I wouldn't say victim of our own success, but we're moving pretty fast so that these endpoints that were otherwise perceived as standard is seemingly a little bit obsolete. And this isn't trash talking other cancers that are more common, but if it also with myeloma, it's kind of difficult because, well, you don't have thousands and thousands of patients who could actually be put on clinical trials very quickly and give us this very, very long-term outcome. So we're going to have to, I would argue that the bar has got to we can leave the bar high, but we need a much closer way to sort of figure out what works and what doesn't work so that we can keep moving along a wait that's too long hurts more people than helping them.
Well, I just had a question about when you're thinking about sequencing. So if stem cell transplant, I know is very commonly used still, how long, and your counts drop and then you recover, and then if you're going to do stem cell transplant, how long do you have to wait before you do like a bispecific or a CAR T following that, because you're going to see another drop in counts, and you probably don't want to do that too close, but then you were saying that you can maybe restore some T cell function by doing the transplant. So I was just kind of curious about that.
Well, we're involved in a trial, and I don't know if you all are, that is looking at a CAR T right after an auto transplant to get a person in remission, would be the easiest way to think about it. And so the rules of that particular trial are you collect CAR T after they've completed the auto transplant. So they had it about 6 months ago, and then those CAR Ts are collected after 2 weeks off, lenalidomide or lenalidomide based, and then they go and get a CAR T. Now, there are other trials where they're trying to do an add-on within 60 days. And I think most people think that that is going to be safe. There have been some small studies that have been presented looking at that. But I think you can do it pretty fast. Now, some of those studies are actually going to be set up that the CAR Ts are collected before the auto transplant, so that they're already there and you can use them. You don't have to worry about going through apheresis again. But we'll see.
Yeah, I think we're doing studies where they're allowing it to be administered within the first 90 days.
And I think, Dr. Rich, was that study sort of doing the CAR T in patients who perhaps did not achieve this this complete remission with MRD negativity,
Correct.
right? So it's sort of more or less trying to use the CAR T soon to deepen remission in patients who might not have achieved very deep remission after autologous transplant, right?
Correct.
But there were also patients on clinical trials of CAR T that had prior stem cell collected who sort of in a pitch really needed something to get them through their relapsed refractory disease, and they were too sick to be getting a second autologous transplant. There are leftover cells. So it's sort of whatever you can get people into remission and recover from side effects of the treatment, it may open opportunities that probably weren't doable at the time of their last line of treatment. So, I mean, I think things are moving really quickly. And whenever I think about immunotherapy, it's sort of, it is designed to be very specific to the cancer cells, harnessing the immune system to do the job. So hopefully while it's doing what it's supposed to do, the rest of the body at least get a chance to recover from what damages to cancer cells have caused them. So things that weren't used could actually end up getting used later. We can recycle some of the older therapies that we were worried about using just because patients were too sick. So it's very much a moving target right now.
There was a brief discussion earlier about the financial side or toxicity for treatment, and it's something that's very dear to my heart. And so with the new novel treatments coming out, we know the cost of that is going to go up. And with a lot of the, right now, nonprofits have no money, and a lot of patients are being squeezed. How are you addressing that with your patients?
Fortunately, most of the novel treatments, the CAR T and the bispecifics, come out of what is called the medical benefit of the patient. And so it usually doesn't lead to the patient having too many out-of-pocket costs, because those are usually the drugs that you get out of your pharmacy benefit, oral drugs, that patients incur the cost. Obviously, there are allied costs of you coming in and seeing the doctor and getting labs, whichever your insurance, asks you to have co-pays for. But the drugs per se, at least, are incurring a cost at the moment, which is more apparent to us, at least, to the provider system. Where the reimbursement for these products in a in-hospital setting is leading to the institutions putting, at least in our center, certain limits on how many of these can be provided per unit of time. For example, for teclistamab, we have a policy where we cannot give it to more than 2 people a week, because each patient who's admitted for the hospital incurs a loss of anywhere between $5,000 to $8,000 an admission. And if your patient is treated as an outpatient at your facility, then the hospital will make up that money over the period of time, given how reimbursement works in the United States. But if the patient goes back to a community doctor, the hospital is left holding a bill wherein they've lost $8,000 or more, and they never can recoup the cost. So those are the kind of considerations that are coming up for bispecifics. With that modeling in our institution is going to be losing $1 million if they just limit it to 2 patients a week. That's their modeling. With CAR-T, it is also a different issue. Again, this is very complex, but the way these are reimbursed, the cost of the CAR-T is about the cost of the CAR-T is anywhere between around $500,000, and Medicare pays $269,000 to the hospital, and they're expected to make up for it by what they call billing for the remainder as a percentage of what's called the charge master. So again, this is very complex, but if an institution puts on their website that we provide CAR-T for $1.5 million, that means that if a patient didn't have insurance and had to pay out of pocket, they would have to pay $1.5 million. Nobody, fortunately, at least in the United States, is having to do that. But Medicare will pay them a proportion of $1.5 million. Now, big universities like ours shy away from putting saying it's $1.5 million for a product that costs $500,000. They'll put their charge master at $650,000. And they're scared about public pushback if it were to become public that this hospital charges 3 times the amount of what is actually the cost that the pharmaceutical company sells the product for, because patients don't realize why this is done. But Medicare, in their infinite wisdom, will pay, no questions asked, same proportion of $1.5 million to one hospital and the same proportion of $650,000 to the next hospital. And it will, they don't ask, why is this hospital giving it cheaper? Maybe that is where they should go. No, that's their model. That's the problems. Those are the financial things that we are facing.
And of course, I'll just come out to say that I'm not at all a financial expert, but on the receiving end, I mean, we totally understand that patients should never need to be put to make decision between spending the money to do things that are critical for your life, your family, or spending it on your health. I mean, really, that's a no-win situation. But cost of care has gone up. No question. This newer therapy is more expensive than ever. Also, it does not lead to cost of existing therapy going down. If many of you have been taking your therapy over the years, you go back, look at your bill, and you're saying, well, you know, all of this new hot stuff are coming out. Why wouldn't the old things get cheaper? Well, it doesn't. So it is a bigger health care problem. These novel immunotherapies continue to fall into that pricey stuff. Luckily, at least the inpatient portion, there are certain ways to get it covered, in some ways better than others. But I think oral agent continues to be a big issue because they're covered by insurance, but they may leave patients with quite a bit of a copay. And that's really where these outside resources need to come in. I don't pretend to have a solution, but I also think that if you were ever thinking about advocating for yourself, there's a bigger issue of drug cost in the whole society that a physician complaining about it alone just doesn't get us to a solution. Really, the voice comes from patients advocates. And it's hard for me to even imagine patients having enough bandwidth to not only take care of their health, taking care of their family, and also think about calling their Congress. But if you ever have neighbors, family members coming to you and say, I don't want to send any more casseroles because you don't even like them, what can I do to help? Then say, aside from coming once in a while to mow the grass, call the congressman, speak about awareness of myeloma, because for a rare disease, the advance really takes everyone coming together, participating in patient advocacy group, HealthTree, for example, or any other ones that you feel passionate about, Leukemia Lymphoma Society and so on. They'll get the name of myeloma out there and our kind of problems out there. And we can all move forward better together. But right now, it is a problem.
One thing that we really advise patients, this is something that's another big benefit of clinical trials. So there are clinical trials out there for CAR T, there are clinical trials for bispecifics. That is a fantastic way to get access to that, as well as helping yourself, and then obviously helping other people with myeloma too. So we really try to make sure that we're looking for a clinical trial anytime we meet a patient, because I think it just makes a lot of sense.
I would like each of you to take about 30 seconds to a minute, and then we'll close. What would you say to a bright young doctor who is coming to your institution to be a fellow? Well, before I say that, the great tension here is we have patients living with the disease and all the uncertainty that goes with it. And on the other hand, they're hearing about all this optimism about what's going on. So knowing that, when you have a young fellow that's coming in, why would you advise them to go into myeloma as a specialty today?
I'll take the first tab because that was how I got into treating myeloma. I was going to be a leukemia doctor, but myeloma was really paving the way. And this was really like 2 decades ago now. So I probably tell any young physicians coming into myeloma that our pace of advancement is just unmatched. When I think about myeloma treatment 2 decades ago, it was like waiting for a taxi that didn't come, right? And every 10 years, you'd actually have like another taxi that comes. Now, you have all of these taxis and buses and planes all coming together at the same time. It just takes researchers to figure out who gets to ride on what, and also how to sequence all of these rides. But the technology is here. The new treatments are already here. And I think if we sequence it right, we're really looking at curing myeloma patients. I think the cure is probably already here. It just needs some extra time to prove it. But also, I think they will not only see a cure in their lifetime, but also hopefully help patients who are cured live the best quality of life as possible. So I think that will be the primary reason they should choose to treat myeloma.
I probably second that. I think that myeloma has become the prototype of a chronic disease. And as you just said, I think that the new fellows coming in are probably going to be seeing hopefully a majority of their patients during their lifetime in their profession saying the myeloma is cured. And I think that the other thing is that the science is exciting, and also the bond that you form with your patients is more so than most cancers because of the chronicity of the disease.
I guess I would say, having worked in myeloma for a number of years, that it is like an amazing puzzle. And what's the difference about sitting at your kitchen table and putting this puzzle together is when we put in a piece, we help somebody. We help somebody change their life and get back to the life that they want to live. And it's still a huge puzzle with a lot of pieces missing, but you as the, wherever Greg went, the theoretical young person going into this, you can be part of putting in these puzzles and really getting us to what we all want to be at, which is a cure for myeloma.
I actually tell, I think if I haven't told any of you in the room with me, is usually that I'm going to retire in, we thought 20 years, but now I'm aging in this past year, so it's now 17. I'm going to pass them on to young colleagues because I think there's a good chance my myeloma patients will actually outlast me.
And if I could just add my own editorial comment to that before I pass the last word to Jenny. In 1998, there were 40,000 Americans living with myeloma. At the end of this year, there will likely be 220,000 Americans living with myeloma, and that number is increasing at a minimum of 20,000 a year. And it's probably going to go to 25 or 30,000 in the foreseeable future. So this, to me, is the optimism. I mean, there are people that are still suffering from myeloma, and there will be people who will have catastrophic diagnoses in the coming year. But many, many, many more of them are going to live good, long lives than any group of patients in history. And it's only getting better every year after that. So I want to thank you for coming. I want to thank you for hanging out for the whole day. And I'm going to give the last word to Jenny.
Well, I just want to thank Greg for putting this meeting together. And I want to thank these amazing doctors. Can we please give them a round of applause? As you can see, it's incredible to have a myeloma specialist on your team, and you should be coming to these doctors and telling your friends in the clinic to do the same. So whatever you can do to spread the word about the physicians, the resources, and everything else, it would be very helpful. So thank you for coming. We appreciated having you here today, and it was a great, amazing day. Thank you.